January 28th, 1983.
Yeah.
This is
That's
Joe
right.
Todd, interview with Mae Van Camp. Mrs. Van Camp, when were you born?
Minnesota.
Minnesota. And when's your birthday?
Do I have to tell you that? November the 19th, 1892. So you know that I'm 90 years old right now.
90 years old.
And I don't like it.
You don't like it?
No.
How long did you live in Minnesota?
Oh, I was born there and reared. I had my high school education there. So,
What town in Minnesota?
Detroit Lakes, if you know. It's up in the fishing country, in the lake region.
You went through high school there?
Graduated.
What kind of town was Detroit Lakes?
It's a resort town.
Who was your father?
My father, Charles M.
Charles M.
Van Camp.
Van Camp. Is it Miss Van Camp?
Miss, yeah. I can't claim Mrs. I don't want to.
Yeah. And who was your mother?
My mother was Louise Gravel, Gravelle, Van Camp.
Were they both from Minnesota?
No, both of them from Iowa.
Iowa. What'd your father do?
Well, my father was in a heavy hardware and implement business.
In Detroit Lakes?
No, North Dakota.
North Dakota.
Well, Detroit Lakes too, before he went out on his own.
So you went through high school through Detroit Lakes. Then where did you go after high school?
Well, after high school, I finished at Teachers College in Moorehead, Minnesota. State Teachers College.
When did you go to Moorehead?
What?
What year did you go to Moorehead?
1912.
1912.
1912 in Moorehead. And following that, 6 years of teaching in Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota.
What'd you teach?
Oh, elementary. And then Chicago, Red College. 1916 and 17.
How big was Moorehead College when you went there?
Oh, let's see. It was one of the big, I think there are 6 state colleges in Minnesota, and it's one of the 6. Yeah. And, I don't know. We had several thousand students anyway.
Who was head of the school? Who was head of the school when you were going there?
Dr. Weld.
Dr. Weld,
Weld, W-E-L-D. I don't remember what his initials were. Prexy Weld.
Who was your favorite professor at Moorehead?
Say that again.
Who was your favorite professor at Moorehead?
Oh, heck. It's so long ago now, I couldn't tell you.
Did you live on campus?
No, I lived off campus.
Oh, you did?
Off campus.
Did you?
But not very far. just short ways.
Did you board there in Moorehead?
Yes, I had, along with maybe half a dozen others and professors in this private home. And that's what we did. We had our boarding room in that place. So,
whose home was it?
I can't tell you now. Miller, some people by the name of Miller. Mr. and Mrs. Miller. And we had several professors and teachers along with the students in the home.
How big
Hi, Betty. With that.
How big was Gregg College?
Oh, Gregg was a big school. I'll tell you about that. It wasn't too big when they first started, but when Dr. Gregg himself took over the college, the enrollment increased, and I think the 2 years, the years that I was there must have been, probably 100 of us at that time. And we were all taking shorthand, typing, business, English, all the allied subjects with that. Well, then, in 1917, I finished. And I went to Huron. Do you know Huron, South Dakota, in the Black Hills?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I went to Huron to teach. And while I was there, things slip away a little bit. While I was there, I had an offer to go to Grafton, North Dakota, to teach the commercial subjects. Well, heavens, I hadn't been there but just a short time when the war started. And the Surgeon General of the Army, hi, Mr. and Mrs. Percival, the Surgeon General of the Army evidently had been overseas before, because he realized that there was going to be a need for rehabilitation. But who was qualified to do it?
Yeah.
That's it. So, early in 1917, the Surgeon General of the Army put out a call for trained women to volunteer, and it would be overseas. Of course, he thought the war was going to go on and on with that. But anyway, he designated several schools, and I was thinking the other day after and Mrs. Hickok talked to me, let's see, the schools that the Surgeon General designated were Reed College in Portland and let's see, in Battle Creek, Michigan, and the University of California. And there's one more in Boston, and the name begins with P. Ponson. I can't get it, but it's a school in Boston, private school with that. And that was it. So all of the people that were being trained or that were answering his summons were being given the choice of one of those 4 or 5 schools. Well, at the time I was in Grafton teaching, and there was the history teacher also was interested, as was I. So we looked over the prospectus that was sent to us, and we thought that that Michigan would be our best bet because we were in the Midwest. Well, we were too late. We were too late. So they said, no, we couldn't take us. Well, Miss Healy said, how'd it be if we tried Reed College in Portland? And of course, you're too young to know this, but Reed College during the war was a pink college.
Pink college?
Pink, yeah, communist. Dr. Foster, who was the dean, who was the head of the school, was a communist. And he went all over this country preaching that we shouldn't be getting into war, we shouldn't be doing this with Russia, this and that and the other thing. But finally, after the war, and he found out what the situation was, he was a big enough man to go everywhere he had been and talked, to go back and say, I made a mistake. It isn't true. This is the fact. So we gave credit to Dr. Foster. So he was the head of the college while I was there. And we were finally accepted.
In Reed College?
Yes, at Reed College. And that's right now one of the big progressive schools, if you know it. With it, I can't give you the enrollment, but must be around 10,000 or more.
Yeah. What kind of school is Reed College?
Everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I'm done with it. So, anyway, it was one of the fine universities, progressive.
What part of Oregon is Reed College?
At Portland.
In Portland?
In Portland. Mm-hmm. And one of the they have a big campus there.
Did you live in Portland while you were?
We lived on campus,
all
of
lived
us.
On campus?
Mm-hmm. There were 200 of us answered the call and were sent out to Portland.
Did you live in a dormitory or?
Yes, we lived in the dormitories.
Which one? Do you remember?
Oh, I don't remember which dormitory it was. And we ate in the cafeteria. So we were regular college students, as it turned out. Well, Dr. Beach, of course, we had all the training then in anatomy and kinesiology and French and everything that was going to help us in any way, shape, or manner overseas. Well, anyway, came along 1918, and 1918. Well, then the armistice was signed, of course, in 19. But before that, in the summer of 1918, Dr. Beach said he called several of us into his office one night and said to us, now look, I think there were about 20 or 25 of us out of the 200. Now you people have had special training, And but you're going to be given special priority. Well, of course, I had had business education, and naturally, that's where I fell. So Dr. Beach said, now look, you people are going to finish here in September. And you can expect, we're sending in all your papers to the Surgeon General right from the college. And you can expect to have orders right away quick. Now, you 20 or 25 that are here with your special educations, you're going to have at least two chances. Now, if you want a physiotherapy or you want occupational therapy, choose the one you want and don't wait for the other. If you get occupational therapy, take it. If you get physiotherapy, the orders for that, take it. So that was the order that we got. Well, we didn't get orders. We left the college about the middle of September, I think it was. And of course,
1918?
In 1918. Mm-hmm. And school had already started. You see, I was still on the faculty at Grafton, and so was Mrs. Healy. School had already started, and here we were kind of tag-ending along, wondering where we were going to be. But finally, long about the end of, middle of October, end of October, I got orders overseas. Report New York at the mobilization station at once. So before Armistice Day, we were all in New York at the Hotel Albert, old hotel in New York, way down on the foothills. And I think there must have been probably, maybe 100,000, maybe 1,000 girls at the Hotel Albert, waiting for orders to go overseas. Not only us, but the nurses were there. And here they were. Every night we were in the living room, sitting on duffel bags, waiting for somebody to pick us up to take us over to Hoboken, where we were supposed to board. Well, that went on and on and on. And every day you had to go up to the 34th Street Armory and drill and get your clothing and everything. Well, anyway, the upshot of it was the armistice had been signed and the ships were being turned back from Europe with the personnel that was going over. And long about Christmas time, all of us were alerted and said, now the Albert is being evacuated, and you girls are going to be somewhere by Christmas time. Well, about maybe 10 days before Christmas, 18 of us at the Albert, both physiotherapy and occupational therapy, were sent up to Boston, U.S. General number 10. That was an Army hospital, regular Army hospital, put together by the Elks, if you want to know that. The Elks subsidized. They had a big installation up on Parker Hill, and they just simply turned that over to the Army for barracks. So 18 of us were sent up to Boston. Well, we landed in Boston, and here was U.S. General Number 10, a 600-bed hospital with not a boy in it. Not a boy in it. But 2 days before Christmas, 2 great big transports hove to in the harbor in Boston, and boy, before nightfall, every bed in the hospital was filled. So by Christmas time, we had our full quota of the 26th Division.
26th Division?
Yeah, the 26th Division. That was the New England Division, 26th. Just by way of a funny point, after we got on the wards and had been assigned to where we were to go, and they found out what my name was, they all called me Miss Pork and Beans. So I went all through the war with Miss Pork and Beans as a name. Well, anyway, we were in Boston until June. And then they closed the hospital and said, we've got Army hospitals that where beds aren't being used, so let's use the Army beds where we can. So 600 men and women were evacuated to Plattsburgh Barracks in northern New York. That was a regular Army hospital. So, and a gorgeous, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place it was. Beautiful. Well, anyway, we were there until late fall. And they said, well, we've got more beds in New York and New Jersey than we know what to do with, so we're going to close Plattsburgh Barracks. So the same 600 boys and the nurses and the aides, as they called us, were transferred to Rahway, New Jersey, which was an amputation hospital, wholly amputations. We had some basket cases with that. Well, anyway, Rahway, and there was a hospital in New York, the Bronx, at the time. So they split them between the two. Well, let's see if I can remember straight now. Again, they didn't want the 26th Division leaving the New England states. They wanted their boys to stay in the states. But there were places where nurses and aides were needed. So along about December, January, long in January or February sometime, we got orders. I had been transferred to Rahway at the time, which was, as I said, an amputation. Well, Walters, yeah, with that. Now, I had, as I say, I had been transferred to Rahway. Oh, we had some of the most interesting cases there. Men that were double amputees and all. Well, anyway, the upshot of it was that long after Christmas time, or around Christmas time, we were sent out to Denver, to Fitzsimmons General. So you see, I pretty well have made the rounds of Army hospitals with that. So when I landed, let's see, I think there were 5 or 6 of us that were sent out to Denver. And some friends of ours were in Silver City, New Mexico, who had been in New York at the mobilization station with us, that later showed up in Denver. Well, anyway, when we landed in Denver, we had 2,500 men and women patients in barracks.
In Fitzsimmons.
In Fitzsimmons, in Fitzsimmons with that. And I can't tell you now how many nurses and aides, but there were plenty of us anyway with that. And if you know Denver at all, Fitzsimmons is out from Denver in a little town called Aurora. You remember Aurora? And it's right out on the flats, dirt and dust and everything. Well, of course, the barracks were spread all over the place. With that, you could see the mountains all snow-rimmed and all. Anyway, and it was colder than the devil out there during the winter. And those poor boys, I used to feel sorry for them out there on those porches, open porches, you know, and all of them. We didn't have anything else but TB, tuberculosis, in Denver. Well, in February, then my family had difficulties.
What year was this?
This must have been 20. Yeah, February 20. My family had difficulty, deaths in the family and one thing and another. My mother was ill. So I asked for my resignation. Dining room doors are now open. So I asked for my resignation, got it, and was sent home. Well, from then on, I hadn't been too well, but anyway, later I was sent to Chicago to the Veterans Hospital, Public Health Service first, Public Health Service Hospital, 47th and Drexel. Well, shortly after the public health took it over, the veterans took it over. So I ended up my time in the Veterans Hospital with the final service in Jefferson Barracks in Missouri. But I never served any time in Jefferson Barracks because I refused to take the time. But during that time, at the time that happened, why I refused the Jefferson Barracks one, I was offered a position with the School of Occupational Therapy in St. Louis as a registrar for the school. All right, where we trained students for occupational therapy. Okay, and it is now part of Washington University, of which I am a graduate too, with that. Well, anyway, 10 years at the School of Occupational Therapy. And then hard times came along, and they started just what's happening now, letting people go. Well, I thought to myself, this is a fine time right now. You've been working for a degree. Now is the time to get it. So I just took the time, and I had a little money. And so I said, here we go. And Dean DeBaton told me after I registered, he said, Miss Van Camp, I think you're the oldest person on the campus. I said, I wouldn't be a bit surprised.
How old were you then?
Well, let's see, I must have been 38 or 9 by that time. And you see the students, how much younger they were during those days. That's about what I was, 38 or 9 with that. And I stuck it out and got my degree. And
what did you take? What did you study?
Special education. With that. And that's where all my physiotherapy and my occupational therapy and my grad school stuff came into play, because I had only 1 year to do, and that was my senior year, which had to do on campus with that at Washington University. So that's all we had on that. Well, now let's see, where do I go from there? After the time at Washington University, the St. Louis School of Occupational Therapy, and I did a little social work along the way, just by way of trying my hand. And finally, when Blue Cross and Blue Shield came into being in St. Paul, a man by the name of Van Dyke then shortly after he started the St. Paul plan, I've forgotten the man's name. Van Dyke, I believe, was the man in Washington. Started the plan in Washington, D.C. That was the second one. And he had a young chap with him by the name of Ray McCarthy. He had been from Youngstown, Ohio, and was with Van Dyke there in Washington. Well, about that time, the Medical Society, the St. Louis Medical Society, began to get interested in the health movement. And they heard about Van Dyke and the plan in St. Paul and the one in Washington. So somebody from the St. Louis Medical Society was in Washington and interviewed these men, and they agreed to send McCarthy out to St. Louis to talk about it and interview the doctors and see whether or not there was any real interest in a health movement. And one of the papers, I don't know whether it was the Post-Dispatch or the Globe Democrat in St. Louis, picked up the item, and there was quite a little item in it. And I was doing a little bit of casework for the government, the state government at that time, and I saw this article, and I thought to myself, this is something that I would like to know about and I would like to do. I would like to see and hear what they're going to have to say. Well, they had set up a meeting for the city and the state medical societies for some time. I don't remember just when it was. But I thought, this is where I get my information right, the way I want it. So I went to the meeting that night and heard what McCarthy had to tell these doctors. And bless Pat, they fell for it, tooth and toenail. Of course, McCarthy was one of these spellbinders, one way or the other. So anyway, the upshot of it was that they agreed, the medical society agreed to set up the plan for Missouri, starting with St. Louis first. All right, and with that, they agreed to have McCarthy come out from Washington, give up his job in Washington and come out to St. Louis and take over the establishing of the plan there. Well, he agreed to do it. He was just a young man like you are at the time, and a good-looking one, too. And so a couple months later, he came back out to St. Louis and started the ball rolling, interviewing industry, you know, and all the big corporations and things like that, because after all, they had to have volume if they were going to get anywhere at all, and they were going to have volume to start with. So when McCarthy came, I don't know how I came to know about it, but anyway, I had an interview with McCarthy. Oh, I do know. I was working with the state and federal government with doing casework at the time, and McCarthy came.
This is St. Louis?
In St. Louis, yeah. This is all in St. Louis. And McCarthy came to this group thinking it would be a pilot group and a good one to start with. So he came, that's how I got to have the interview with him. He came and gave us a good talk on it, and everybody was enthused about it, and we agreed to establish a group there. And it's Group 22, I think, in my where's Hi, Robin, with that. 22, group number 22, I think it was. And after McCarthy got this group rolling, then he didn't have too much difficulty because these people were talking about it, don't you know, around the way. Papers were picking it up again. So I've forgotten which month, but it was in 1934 that McCarthy came out first and started the ball rolling and talking about it and getting organized and one thing and another. And I had an interview with him at that time, and of course he checked all my credentials and one thing and another, and discovered that I was a graduate of Washington University in St. Louis with a minor in sociology. Well, of course, that hit him right where he needed to. So he said to me at the time, when we finished the interview, this was in 34, He said, Miss Van Camp, it's like this. He said, I haven't the slightest idea. Hi, Mrs. Kelly. I haven't the slightest idea when this thing is going to get really going. But he said, I'll tell you this right now. You will have a job with us. Well, I said, Mr. McCarthy, it's just like this. I have a job now. And I'm not hurting in any way, shape, or form. And I can wait. He said, all right. I'll promise you that you'll have a job with us. Well, it went along, and he kept enrolling little groups along the way until during these months, he would call, he had hired a secretary, a good one, and the secretary and I, and when he found out that I was a commercial teacher, well, that was swell. So he would, after he got these small groups enrolled, he would call us in to do the certificates and the ident cards on the typewriter, don't you see? So he had a small office in which we could do that sort of thing. So for about 2 years, Mr. Todd, the two of us worked for nothing, just Saturdays and Sundays and evenings after supper and one thing. We didn't even get supper money. So it was a long time before we did get supper money. So in 1936, the ball really got rolling, and the corporation was established for good and all. And it was called Blue Cross and not Blue Shield, because the doctors themselves didn't come in at that time, but Blue Cross of Missouri. Well, that was it. So that's the way the name went for several years.
Why did they name it Blue Cross? Why did they name it Blue Cross?
Frankly, nobody seems to know. I've asked that sort of thing along the way from the Renews people who have retired now, and there are about 50 of us. And nobody seems really to know where Van Dyke got that name from, the man in St. Paul. But anyway, it was a good one, a good name to have. And it's been a good name all the way through. So, poor dear. So with that, then, in 1936, and let's see, what month was it? Must have been about April or May. Mr. McCarthy called me one day. He'd come back from Washington, and he called me, and he wanted to know if I'd come into the office. He wanted to talk with me. So I did. I went into the office that night after dinner, and he said, now look, he said, I'm going to tell you something. He said, and you can take it or leave it, just the way you feel about it. But I'm going to tell it to you honestly. There isn't going to be any money, not for the first few months. But he said that if you can get along on $100 a month, and back in 36, $100 a month was kind of money. If you can get along with $100 a month, come along. Will, you come along? And he said, Frances Burgess, who was his secretary, he said, she won't get any more, and I'm not taking any more. So we all agreed that we would take it along. So we worked Saturdays and Sundays, we worked evenings, we swept, we dusted, we cleaned, we scrubbed. The three of us did everything to get things started. And 1936, I've got one of the first 400, well, I was going to say Social Security is what first 400, but I've got one of the first 22 Blue Cross memberships in that. But of course, naturally, our group would be the one of the first groups to do that. So let's see, Mr. Todd, what came next? Well, anyway, we expanded, we grew, things went well. The Medical Society got behind us, and the papers ballyhooed it. The whole thing went along until they came to the point where they thought they had to hire a new an assistant director. Well, Walter McBee, who later was the director of the Texas plan, came to us as the assistant director. So from then on, we just grew, and we expanded, and more employees, and more groups, and bigger space. During that time, I think we moved about 3 or 4 times, and well, it came up to 1958. And I had been with Blue Cross and Blue Shield then 23, 4, 5 years. Doing everything. I had done every item along the way, just to know how and what was being done in what department. Till I finally ended up with Blue Cross as their director of hospital relations for Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Missouri, which meant that I was dealing with about 110 hospitals, contracts, business arrangements, everything, public relations, hospital relations. And that went along. I traveled the whole state of Missouri and the southern half of Illinois, which was in the St. Louis territory. So that's the way it went, and that's the way I ended up. And I thought I never would end up in a place like this. But here I am. So,
I have a few questions.
Yeah, all right, on that, before I go on to the next era.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, then, of course, leaving Blue Cross, I was at loose ends. I didn't know what to do with myself. But the school board said, look, if you'd like to do some substitute teaching, put in your application and we'll take you on. So for 5 years, I did a substitute 3 days a week for the high schools of St. Louis, which was fine, and I liked it, was good. But then I came to the retirement age. So that was the end of that. And it was the end of that in St. Louis. Because at that time, Mr. Todd, 65, well, when you got 65, you were just over the hill, right and proper. So you just had to go. So that was true of Blue Cross, and it was true of the Board of Education. Well, in the meantime, then, my sister and brother-in-law, who lived in Illinois across the river, my sister used to go up to the lakes in the summertime. It was so hot in Illinois and Missouri. So she used to go up to the lakes in Minnesota. And in the place where we lived, or where we were born and raised, there was a beautiful, beautiful resort hotel that some friends of ours owned. But they didn't like being tied down. So they said, tied down. They didn't like being tied down. In Minnesota now. And that I'm talking about. They didn't like being tied down. They liked to fish and hunt and that sort of thing. So they said to my sister, how'd you like to take over the management of this hotel for the summer, just for the summer, because that's all it was open, 3 months. So my sister did that. Well, then, bless Pat, when the school board thing died out, it just so happened there was a place there at the hotel, and Mrs. Wright, who was one of the owners, said, how'd you like to come on up and take a fling at this with your sister? I said, fine. I haven't anything else to do. So that's what I did. It's 3 years. I was on night duty. I'd go on at 4 and come off, or go on at midnight and come off at 8 and all. But it worked out all right with that. Well, that petered out when they sold the hotel. So what came next? Oh, what came next? My sister and her husband came out to California. My brother was in the oil business, and so he had some business. So they came out. Do you know Leisure World? Out of Los Angeles and out of Long Beach, the cooperative. Well, anyway, that had gotten started. And my brother-in-law's brother-in-law was the manager of the Bank of America in Long Beach. And after Urban Art got out here, he said to Art, let's go out there and take a look at that place that man Cortese is building. Let's see what he's doing. So my brother and sister had been going to Florida for about 21 years every winter. So they said, well, maybe this might be a difference, might be a little change. So they went out there and they found a salesman, and the place was They only had 4 units built at that time, but people were living there, and they were furnished and one thing and another. And Art said, well, believe me, I'm not going to buy out here until I've spent a winter, until I know what the thing is out here. I'm not going to buy. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do the other thing. So my sister didn't say anything, but they finally found a man who said, I've got an apartment that I think you could rent. It's furnished, and I think you can rent it. They went out. Well, they talked and they talked. They were people from Canada, and they didn't like it. Didn't like it in California at all. So, and they had all brand new furniture, everything. They hadn't shipped anything. So the upshot of it was that my sister and brother bought the apartment, furniture and all. That's how they got out to Leisure World. Well, I have to go back now and tell you a little bit about Leisure World. Unless you know.
No, go ahead.
All right. Leisure World is a cooperative. And right now it has around 7,000 apartments in a walled city. It's in Long Beach, not Long Beach, Seal Beach, in Seal Beach. And it's in a sealed city. It has a wall around it. All right. And with about 7,000 people, they have about between 10 and 11,000 people living there now. Well, after Irvin Ark got out there, here was I in St. Louis with nothing to do and nowhere. So the upshot of it was I came out to spend some time with them, and the upshot was I bought it. I bought an apartment. Mr. Todd, I had just come home from Europe. And for years and years, I had saved my money to go to Europe. Else, I'm not one of these picker-uppers and all that sort of thing. So I came home with about $700. And Unit 4, that was the dividing line at the time. And they had begun to build all the units then up to 12, from 4 to 12. And Unit 8 had nothing, and 9 and 10 had nothing but the flats, cement flats with the plumbing sticking up, which had been, and when I saw it, well, I said, all right, if you can buy it, I can buy it too. So the upshot of it was I bought an apartment, a two-bedroom apartment in Leisure World from a woman who lived in Pasadena. I don't remember her name now. But she had broken her hip, and the doctors had said, no living alone, no nothing. Put your apartment on the market and sell it. So I bought it. And I came out to California in, I came first in March. And that was when I first saw it. March of 1962, just after I came home from Europe. And then in 63, 63 or 64. 63. I came out here. My sister and brother were here. So I came out here and then I bought and all. Well, you hear about these things and you wonder how they tick and who makes it go and you wonder everything about it if you have a curious mind, which I have. So immediately I discovered they had activated them. They had activated 4 more units from 4 to 8 to 12. Yes, there were 12 units activated when I came in May of '64. And every unit had it was acting under a parasol, a parasol board. Yeah. And every unit then had a board of trustees elected by the residents, and they handled their own business and all that sort of thing. Well, I began to wonder what they were doing and how they were spending their money and who authorized this and that and the other thing. So I started going to the Golden Rain Board, the board, overall board, meetings once a month. Well, as Mr. Davis, the administrator, said one time later, he said, well, Miss Van Camp did her homework anyway. Well, the upshot of it was that after I had moved in and I went on the board, the mutual board, 8 of 8. And I was on the mutual board 6 or 8 years before I took an office on the board. Well, as a matter of fact, I was 15 years on the board, and 8 of those years I was president of the board. Well, during that time then, every unit had a president, and that group had a group of its own. The president's group, the board of the treasurer's board, and the physical properties board. All right. After I got on the president's board, I was made the president, and I was the president 3.5 years of that board, the only woman that has ever been president of the board, and the only woman who had ever served that length of time. So it was quite a little feather in my cap, one way or the other. Well, then things began to happen, and my sister and brother decided to come out here, and one thing and another. So the Leisure World thing just kind of went to pot as far as we were concerned. You need new cassette.